Welcome back. I'm going to wait a few moments to make sure everyone's connected. I apologize for the slightly late start here. All right, it looks to me like we have everyone in the room. Welcome back. We are reconvening at 1:37 p.m. On the afternoon of September 12th in phase 3 of the hearing in the case of the City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar. I think where we this morning went through the summaries of direct testimony for CalAm's witnesses. I think where we're going to start off is I'm going to turn to Ms. Meisenheimer about how we want to proceed with cross-examination. And then I do have two, what I think are short questions for the witnesses before we move to cross. But I think let's first talk about how that ordering should go. So to you, Ms. Meisenheimer.
Thank you. Yeah, we've conferred over the break, and I think what makes the most sense is for us to plan for an hour a witness. And so I know that they're on a panel, but typically how the questioning has gone is it goes witness by witness. And then of course there are other people who can step in if needed. And so what we're envisioning is that for each witness, let's say Mr. Durbin, who had the pleasure of going first, MCWD and Marina would divide up that hour, but it is not a lot of time to cross-examine a witness, particularly when you're dealing with documents and shuffling. And so what Mr. Lilly has done in the past is allowed, if the questioning is efficient and we're sort of getting somewhere, for that examination to go a little bit longer if needed. And so that's what we would envision at this point, an hour for Mr. Durbin, an hour for Dr. Ye, and an hour for Mr. Leffler.
Thank you. I think that makes sense to me. I understand in terms of flexibility. I share the same approach. If the questioning is, aim for an hour, but questioning is productive, and given that it does take some time to flip back and forth between documents, that's certainly true. That we may go, I would certainly consider going beyond that, but I would want at that point, and I presume you would do this, just a general understanding of how much longer and the subject matter of the questions. So,
of course, that's fair. And then we would assume that the same structure would also apply when CalAm is doing its questioning of witnesses, where they would each be, allotted an hour per witness with sort of the same parameters. If they were aiming at a very different approach, I think we should talk about that now to make sure that everyone's sort of on the same footing as we do this process.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm not sure. Well, I can turn to CalAm, whichever representative would like to chime in, but I would think that there may be some flexibility. I don't know that an hour, dividing exactly an hour per witness makes sense. It depends on the length of the witness's testimony. So I think, Mr. Osias, I see once again you are off mute, so I'll turn to you. But I would certainly think it might be reasonable to have a different breakup depending on how things work.
Yes.
But, okay.
And so it sounds like, frankly, 3 hours, because we have three for the other side, because we have 3 witnesses, 4 hours because they have 4 witnesses for our side, and plus or minus a few, as you commented. And I think you're right, depending upon who testifies and in what order, which we've actually, by the end of today, it'd be nice to know what sequence they're going to go in.
Yeah.
For preparation. But aside from that, I think in general, that approach it makes sense.
The only caveat I would have there is that, it's a funny situation, right? We do have 4 witnesses, they have 3 witnesses, but they're all sort of covering the same territory. We just have a few more people speaking, but it may make sense for us to have a little bit of leeway as each of their witnesses covers a little bit more ground, so that it's not sort of we get 3, they get 4 at the end of the day.
We got surprised. I don't want to rehash.
Yeah.
We got a brand new witness where we were even told we might get more time because we don't have even the fundamentals down. So I don't think it's unfair to have an hour per witness. as we started the rule.
I raise that just, the last thing we need to do is sort of bicker or hash it out here. My suggestion would be if we do start with that sort of rough hour a witness and see how we go, and as issues arise, deal with them at the time. I think that should work.
Thank you, Ms. Meisenheimer, and thank you, Mr. Osias. And I think Ms. Meisenheimer, you said exactly what I was going to say, which is, sounds like we have a general understanding, which I think is good enough for now. And we'll proceed, and I will, we can make decisions and deal with those as they come up, but I think we have a general understanding of approximately an hour per witness. I think with that, maybe we can turn to the two questions that I had. To the extent that it's helpful to deal with these first, we can deal with them first. I mean, we very well may have more questions after cross. I don't know with respect to whether these questions are best directed to Mr. Durbin, Dr. Ye, or Mr. Leffler, so I'm going to put them out there. Do we have everyone? Oh, we do. We have, I see everyone on the line. So my question first, and I apologize in advance because I don't have a slide number, although we saw this figure in various forms several times during the course of, I think, everyone's summary of their direct testimony. And this is the figure that shows the various wells and TDS concentrations. So there's various wells and a different, we saw different ones based on which aquifer it was in. But there were various wells, and I'm going to look to the attorneys or the experts to help me find a slide that we can pull up. I think it was shown a number of times.
Do you care which aquifer?
Well, the 180-400 was more interesting. It had red colors.
Yeah.
That would be
So
great.
in exhibit 190, PDF, or let's say page 30, I think would be my guess. That would be in the Dr. Ye slide deck, and it's the 400 because it had the red dots.
Yep.
Aquifer.
Great. Let's try that. Ms. Mullen, if you would please pull up CalAm 190, and it sounds like we'll try page 30.
Bonus points if I get this right.
Oh, look at that. It is bonus points. So this one, let's zoom, if we can zoom in a little bit so we can see the numbers associated with the dots. By we, I mean me with my small screen. Thank you, that's perfect. So my question here is, and this is a nice, and maybe we need to go to another figure, but my question here is, this shows that in these areas, there is some level in the modeling output shows some increase in TDS concentrations. I understand these are in areas where there's relatively high TDS concentrations to begin with, but there are some of these numbers that are positive, which show an increase in TDS concentration. And then there was also testimony, I believe from Dr. Ye particularly, but maybe from others, about an expected, what I understood as an expected net decrease in inflow from the ocean, seawater inflow, as a result of the pumping from the slant wells. And I understand, I understand this was broken down in different areas as to what the net impact would be, but overall a general net decrease in inflow from seawater. And I just wondered if, I think I'd appreciate a little more explanation of the relationship between that decrease in net inflow and then these increases in TDS. One, I just want to make sure that as a non-scientist that there is not some way for TDS to increase other than seawater intrusion, that I'm misunderstanding something. And then two, how those relate. So this is a very general question and is a terrible question in terms if I were an attorney and cross-examining you, but it's a very open-ended general question to try to improve my understanding. So I'm not sure who is in the best position to address it, but I will leave that to one of you, please.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll start. So that the analysis that we did, well, I think there were multiple analyses, but one of them I'll use as an example is where we looked at the zone budget behind the capture zone. So what we're saying there is that within the area of the capture zone, there's a certain amount of ocean inflow that flows through that zone and then, you know, further inland, like it just continues flowing inland several miles inland. And, you know, that's why, of course, we have seawater intrusion in the basin. And so when you look at the without project condition and the with project condition, if you look at the entirety of the area, the capture zone with plus the area to the north and south, what you find is that first of all, the seawater intrusion that was flowing through that capture zone area is now captured. So that no longer flows inland. So that's a reduction in the net inland flow. And then in the areas just to the north and south, you have some of those flow paths wrap around behind the capture zone and then flow inland. So there's sort of this small amount of additional ocean inflow just north and south of the capture zone that wraps around the capture zone and then flows inland. But that's substantially less than the reduction for the amount that's reduced within the capture zone. So there's this net total decline in ocean inflow beyond a certain point, beyond a certain inland point. So you will see some relatively small increases near the shoreline relative to the high salinity that exists there. But then once you get a certain distance inland, you can see that the numbers are pretty much, for the most part, you know, close to zero or negative. So that I think is, you know, part of the explanation for why you see some areas of increases, because those are in areas closer to the shoreline where there's already saline water.
Would it be helpful to have the experts superimpose on top of this map the capture zone and the regions that were identified on separate slides that you already have, so that they're all sort of pancaked on one, so you can see those areas that Mr. Loeffler just described? That's just combining 3 slides into one super slide.
I appreciate the offer, although I think I can, you know, I don't need to leave it to my imagination, but I think the explanation from Mr. Loeffler was quite clear, in my opinion.
Okay.
And I understand it. So I appreciate that, but I think I do understand where we are, and I can, I will take the chance to go back and look at the slides side by side, but I can do that off the time of your experts. That is very clear. I appreciate that. I have one other question related to, I believe, Dr. Ye's testimony, although once again, I appreciate whichever one of you would like to chime in, which is, I believe Dr. Ye touched on this issue of return water deliveries to Castroville based on the ocean water percentage. And I just wanted to understand whether or not that those return water deliveries and then the resulting now I don't have the words for it, but effectively decreases in pumping by leaving the water in the ground, whether those are incorporated into the models in any way. I didn't know if they're within the geographic boundaries of the models, or whether that arrangement has been incorporated into CalAM's model runs. And then part 2 of the question, which may not, I'm not sure if you're the right team to ask. I can ask it of Marina Coast, but then my next question would be, has that been incorporated into Marina Coast models? So.
Okay, Miss Kenzie, for the additional model run with the return water, we made a 2 model run, 6% return water and 9%. So use that number percentage multiplied by the cylinder well pumping, we get the amount of water. Then we look at the pumping wells in the Castro Vale area and just reduce that pumping by 9% or 6% pumping in that area. We run the model to compare to 1B without project scenario.
And these were, okay, so these were, thank you, Dr. Ye. These were separate model runs from, I mean, these were run independently from the model runs that, for example, produced these, what I'm looking at, this TDS.
By the way, it's on this exhibit on slide 12.
Okay.
Right.
If we want to go off of this
Yeah.
for a minute, because it also references where it's addressed in the TM, which would be a useful reference for
That would be useful. If we please, Ms. Mullen can go to slide, is it page 12? We'll try page 12 and see if that's slide 12.
Yep.
And so that is your testimony here with this is with respect to these separate model runs that addressed 2 different scenarios in terms of the percentage of return water.
Right. So for example, here we say the 9% return water scenario 3B minus scenario 1B.
I see.
Yeah. Then we have another 6% return water scenario 3B. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify and fully answer your question, so this was not incorporated into the baseline model runs or really most of the model runs. It was just where it stated that these were, their own model runs that we incorporated this. But I would note that this is a requirement of the project. So, there will be these return flows, which will serve to, reduce the drawdowns and the induced inflow outside the capture zone.
Thank you, Mr. Leffler. I don't have any additional questions. Those were the 2 I had at this point. So I think I would be prepared, unless there is something else we need to address, that we could turn to cross-examination. I assume Mr. Durbin would be first, unless Ms. Meisenheimer, you tell me you would like a different order. And I think Ms. Mullen, we can remove that. Thank you. I can see the room better. Ms. Meisenheimer, is that correct? Would you be looking to cross-examine Mr. Durbin first?
That is correct.
Great. With that, then I see Mr. Durbin is here and he's off mute. So I think it is your witness, Ms. Meisenheimer, and please proceed.
Thank you.
Little introductory thing. Last time we spoke at the last hearing, I had difficulty in hearing you. I can hear all the other speakers, but there's something I don't know.
Something about my audio, huh?
Well, who knows? But I think last time you solved this by being closer to your microphone and speaking a little louder. If I would appreciate that, or it would help both of us.
Sure. No, it's very important that you can hear me. And let's try this. If you cannot hear me, let me know. I have a microphone. I can also try plugging in. I haven't used it in a little while, but that may help. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And as I was just speaking, are you able to hear me okay?
I can right now, yes.
Great. Okay, well, good afternoon, Mr. Durbin. I think you do remember me. I'm Larissa Meisenheimer. I'm one of the attorneys for the city of Marina. to start off today, you've signed on to a number of exhibits. And so I'd like to start by clarifying the scope of the work that you did in phase 3. You're looking at me with a puzzled look. Can you hear?
Yeah, so you're asking about the scope of work, Jim?
Yeah. If we could put up exhibit CalAm 176, page 3. If we could take a look at paragraph 8. This is your direct phase 3 testimony. Do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
In paragraph 8, you state my role in this phase of the state board referral proceeding was to address the AHO's additional questions concerning protective gradients within the Monterey subbasin. And in connection with that, you put in exhibit CalAm 179, right?
Yes.
But in the direct testimony phase, you did not co-author the technical memorandum 177 that was put in by Mr. Leffler and Dr. Ye, correct?
That's correct.
I think we established in phase 2 that you did not build the CalAm 2023 groundwater flow model, correct?
Correct.
And you were not a co-author of Mr. Leffler's memorandum on the variable density model, right?
I am not.
And you did not do the work to alter the SWIM variable density model, correct?
Which model are we referring to now?
It's the acronym used is SWIM. It's the Montgomery and Associates variable density model that Mr. Leffler altered.
I did not participate in that.
Then, and we can take this down now. For phase 3 rebuttal, you submitted an additional TM about groundwater pumping and potentially intruded areas of the model domain, right?
Yes.
And then in phase 3, you're also a co-signatory of the TM that Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler put in exhibit 187.
Correct.
I did notice that exhibit 187 has information about protective gradients and about the placement of wells and seawater intrusion. I'm assuming that you were involved in those portions of exhibit 187, correct?
Remind me again, what's the topic of 187?
That is the rebuttal technical memorandum, the lengthy one that Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler put in. It's the main rebuttal to MCWD's phase 3 submissions.
And it's the one co-authored by me.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay. So we got that. So now, what is the question?
No problem. The question was, I did see in that memo, there was stuff about protective gradients, which you were involved in, right?
Yes.
And there was also information about, I know that there was a dispute concerning wells pumping in areas that MICRA has designated seawater intruded. And I saw that you put in a TM on that subject. And so I assume you were involved in those portions of 187, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. But you did not actually open up and look at MCWD's solute transport model, right?
No, I relied upon the staff at Dr. Ye's office.
And you did not personally do any work to analyze or modify Mr. Leffler's variable density model, correct?
I did not.
And you did not personally prepare any of the particle tracks that we've been looking at in these presentations, correct?
I did not.
And so is the main reason you signed on to exhibit 187 because of the materials about protective gradients and where the location of the seawater intrusion wells?
No, it's broader than that. My name is on it because participated as a reviewer and advisor on various aspects of that work.
Okay. I'd like to pivot for a moment to recharge. You provided recharge from your regional model for the CalAm 2023 groundwater flow model, right?
Correct.
And is it okay if I refer to that as the 2023 CalAm model?
Well, clarify whether you're talking about the regional model or the local model.
Okay, the 2023 local CalAm model.
Okay.
If we could go to exhibit CalAm 177. Mr. Durbin, do you recognize this as the TM that Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler submitted and CalAm's direct testimony?
Yes.
If we could go to page 10 of the PDF. Okay. I'm going to direct you to, it's the second sentence in the top paragraph where it says, for the previous model scenarios, recharge calculations were based on unit rates for individual land use types derived from the Regional Salinas Valley Seaside Model, SVSM, used in the calibrated CalAm WBSSM 2023. This was incorrect since unit rates were only applied to a portion of the land use area within the SVSM. Do you see that?
The question again is,
Do you see that?
well, I see the sentence, yes, and I read along silently as you read it.
Great. As you sit here today, is it your belief that the recharge that was used in the CalAm 2023 local model was incorrect?
In the initial model, which I guess is, I'm forgetting what the phase 2 model exhibit might be, but as I testified in phase 2, there was a miscommunication between Dr. Ye and myself, and the recharge that's in the local model was incorrectly translated from the regional model.
Did you personally participate in how the recharge from the regional model was translated into the local model?
Well, I didn't, sit at the computer and type in numbers. I certainly didn't do that, but I had a number of conversations with Dr. Ye on how this should be done.
So it sounds like you guided, but you didn't do the actual work. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
And when did you learn that a mistake had been made in the CalAm model submitted in phase 2 of this proceeding?
Right, a day or two prior to the phase 2 hearing.
And how did you come to learn that the mistake had been made?
I'm not totally sure, but it must have been a conversation with Dr. Ye that from what he said, I recognized that it hadn't been done correctly.
And have you independently verified that it was a mistake? And in fact, the recharge in CalAm's phase 2 model was wrong?
Again, I didn't look at the model input files, but I had a number of conversations with Dr. Ye, and I will presume that he understood what I was saying and implemented it.
So are you relying upon Dr. Ye's determination that the recharge in the phase 2 model was wrong?
Am I the how it was discovered again that there were problems with the recharge was that a few days again before the hearing, in a conversation about perhaps something else, Dr. A made some statement that led to my understanding that he had misunderstood what I had given to him.
And Mr. Durham, my apologies. This is probably my poor phrasing. I am definitely not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to get a sense. Did you independently verify that you think it was a mistake what Dr. Ye did, or did Dr. Ye just tell you he had looked at it and he thinks he made a mistake?
Well, I don't know what you mean verify. I did verify. The verification came through my conversation with Dr. Ye and his description of what he did.
Okay, and this determination that CalAm believes it made a mistake in its phase 2 model, is that what led to the recharge sensitivity scenarios that we see in CalAm 177?
Yes.
Okay. So if we could go to page 17 of the PDF, please. And thank you, Ms. Mullen. If we could scroll down to table 3.2. Now, this chart shows the recharge that CalAm used in its 2023 phase 2 model. And then on the right-hand side, it shows what was changed for CalAm's RS scenarios, right?
Yes.
Did you personally calculate the recharge that's used in these RS scenarios?
No, because those numbers come from work that Dr. Ye's staff did in with more primary or fundamental numbers that I gave to them.
So these recharge sensitivity numbers are a result of the calculations of Dr. Ye and his team.
Yes, he calculated these based upon some information that I gave to him and his staff.
I'd like to discuss the impacts of these changes to recharge in the RS scenarios. Do you believe that the amount of recharge to the DSA impacts the anticipated ocean water percentage for the slant wells?
I don't have an opinion on that. I think that's a question that should be directed to Dr. Ye.
I'll follow up with him. You may not know the answer to this one then either, but all else being equal, does less recharge to the DSA mean less fresh water taken in by the slant wells?
Repeat that again.
Sure. All else being equal, if there's less recharge coming from the DSA, doesn't that mean less fresh water being taken in by the slant wells?
Well, I think that's too complicated to answer here. I think that what should be done is to look at, for these various scenarios, how they affected the seawater percentage. And then I think, again, that's something that Dr. Ye could answer for you and tell you what the sensitivity of that percentage is to changing the recharge.
Sure. And CalAm did put in a chart analyzing it. It sounds like you're not familiar with that chart.
Not familiar with what?
Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, pretty well. I'm sorry that I have to keep asking, but
No, it's quite all right. I want to make sure you can hear me. My question to you was, and more of a comment, there is a chart in here that shows the impact of the RS scenarios on OWP but it sounds like you're not as familiar with that, and Dr. Ye is the person to talk to. Is that right?
Yes.
Sorry, can you put up what chart we're talking about?
I only have an hour here. If he's not familiar, I'd like to cover that with Dr. Ye.
I think it's, well, let's pause the hour. Let's find the chart. And then we can just verify that we're all thinking of and talking about the same chart. I think that would be, I'm thinking of a chart also, but it would be good for me to make sure I am thinking of the chart we're all thinking of.
Okay.
And I will turn
believe
not
that
just, okay, go ahead, Ms.
Yeah.
Meisenheimer. If you have it, that's great.
Yeah, I believe the chart is page 26 of this PDF. Okay. Well, and I think we just scrolled past it. Apologies. It's in that table 3.8. Mr. Durbin, have you seen this table before?
Yes.
Okay. And my question to you was about whether reducing the recharge in the DSA would have an impact on anticipated OWP. Do you recall that question?
I do.
Sure. And I can ask you a follow-up now, and that is, if you look at this chart, can you see that the impact of the RS scenarios, if you look across that bottom line, is to substantially increase the anticipated OWP in the slant wells?
Objection substantially. I don't know that 5% is substantially.
I think that's fair. Well, let's pause for a moment, Mr. Durbin. Ms. Meisenheimer, if you would please just ask the question again without the term substantially. We'll let Mr. Durbin characterize it. Thank you.
Sure. So let's take scenario B. Can you see that the freshwater percentage for scenario B, in B3 it is 9% and it drops down to 6% in RS3. Do you see that?
So which, you're looking at B3?
Yes, I'm looking at, and again, I can cover this with Dr. Ye, which may make a little bit more sense if he is more familiar with this chart.
I think that this,
Benzie, I know you had wanted to put this up. If you'd like me to cover it with Mr. Durbin, I'm happy to do so, or you can direct me to move on.
yeah, let's defer to Dr. Ye.
Well, it sounds like Mr. Durbin would prefer to defer to Dr. Ye, which makes sense. So let's use our time efficiently. Thank you, Ms. Meisenheimer.
Sure. If we could go back to page 17, which was table 3.2. And so this is back to the change that CalAm made to recharge, going from its phase 2 flow model to these RS sensitivities scenarios. So if we can take a look at the dune sand complex in particular, and let's start with scenario B, which I think is CalAm's preferred scenario. Mr. Durbin, do you see that in the AHO phase 2 scenario, CalAm used recharge of 7,313 within the DSA?
Correct. I see that number.
And with the recharge sensitivity scenario, do you see that CalAm reduced that recharge within the DSA complex to 2,713?
Yes.
And would it sound right if I tell you that's roughly a 60% reduction?
It's, yeah, something like that.
Sure. And I promise I won't hold you to math on the spot. I have run that calculation. And then if you compare it to the reduction in recharge outside of the dune sand complex, you'll see in scenario B, it starts at 25,531. And then in the recharge sensitivity scenario, it drops to 23,610. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's, less than a 10% reduction, correct?
Something like that.
And so would you agree with me that the RS scenarios really focus the reduction in recharge on that dune sand complex area?
Do I agree with you to what?
That the RS scenarios really focus the reduction in recharge on the DSA area?
Yes, it was a lot of the change was a lot substantial amount of the change was there, and not a lot of other places. Yes.
And before we pivot topics, one other question for you. If there are errors in the groundwater flow model recharge, that also has the impact or the potential impact of creating errors in K values in the phase 2 model, right?
You're frozen on the screen. Are you speaking to me?
Are you having trouble hearing me?
There was something on the internet, so
He said you froze, and so I think the answer to your question, Ms. Meisenhammer, was yes. He did not hear what you just asked him.
I think you
Thank
did
you.
not freeze for the rest of us, but I think there may have
Right.
been a connectivity problem. So if you would please repeat the question.
Sure. So Mr. Durbin, if there is an error in the groundwater flow model in recharge, would you anticipate that that may also cause errors in K values within the model?
I'm not sure that as far as the recharge, I don't think there's something they're called an error, other than the kind of thing that I described. But I think particularly in the conductivity of the aquifer that overlies the FOSVA would be affected by that recharge value. I'm not sure that other values would be affected or not. Probably not.
And then if there are errors in recharge and possibly some K values in the flow model, it's possible that those issues also impact the transport model as well, right?
They have some, when you change any of these numbers, there's always some difference that occurs, but it all depends upon the sensitivities of things like the recharge to some particular point of interest with respect to the transport model. So yes, there's sensitivities. They can go up or down with a particular change, but the only way really to test it is to those sensitivities is to look at the run the transport model with and flow model with different values of recharge or any other quantity of interest. That's the whole purpose of the sensitivity analysis.
I would just like to add on here. I think it's very important to point out that even without a change in the hydraulic conductivity, and it would only be a relatively small change in those hydraulic conductivities in that area, this recharge sensitivity model calibrates just fine. Its overall calibration is very similar to the MCWD model. It's still better calibrated in the upper 180. And so there's nothing wrong with this recharge sensitivity model. It calibrates just fine the way it is, and it's a perfectly valid model. It doesn't have errors in it in terms of that. It's perfectly well calibrated and useful model.
And I don't want to go too far down this road right now, but Mr. Leffler, you would acknowledge that these recharge sensitivity scenarios are an uncalibrated model, right?
It's not uncalibrated. It's calibrated just fine. It meets industry standards, well within industry standards. It's calibrated just fine.
Let me rephrase it a little bit. CalAm did not recalibrate after making these fairly dramatic reductions in recharge, right?
It didn't need to
Objection
be
to-
recalibrated. It calibrates just fine without doing any further changes. We've checked that.
And I know we've got a whole other series of questions for you, Mr. Leffler. I want to stay focused on where we're going at the moment. If we could, and Mr. Durbin, I think where we ended up, but correct me if I'm wrong, is you would agree that if there are errors in a flow model, they can impact the transport model's reliability, right?
If there are changes in some quantity that goes into the model, to some degree or another, that impacts the performance of the model, of the flow model, and the transport model. And again, as I said before, the only way to understand the importance of those changes is to actually make the changes and observe the results. And that's been done. I think that in the figures and text in this report, that's those comparisons have been made. An assessment has been made of the significance or lack of significance of the differences.
Sure. And I think that's a subject more for Dr. Ye, so we will get into the specifics and the statistics there. I'd like to pivot to another area, Mr. Durbin, that you're very involved in, and that's the protective gradients. If we could put up CalAm 179. Okay. And if we could, thank you, Ms. Mullen, if we could show them the first page first. Do you recognize this as your Exhibit 179, your August 14 memo about protective heads in the Monterey Subbasin?
I do.
If we could go to page 11, figure 2. Okay. Now this chart shows your conceptual drawing for hydraulic gradients with the migration of seawater intrusion front for scenarios B3 and D3 with pumping, correct?
Mhm.
Objection, I think you said D. Did you mean B?
Well, the full page is B3 and D3, but I think we can only see B3 in the portion we can see on the page right now.
So what's your question? Sorry.
My question is whether this figure 2, which we can only see half of at the moment. Let me just focus it on the top half then. This chart shows your conceptual drawing for hydraulic gradients and the migration of seawater intrusion for scenario B3 with pumping, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you show a line from the project slant wells to the MCWD wells and provide a calculation for the hydraulic gradient, correct?
Say that again.
You show a line from the project slant wells to the MCWD well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you provide a calculation for the hydraulic gradient, correct?
Yes.
I have a few areas of questions for you about it. First, this conceptual drawing does not take into account variable density, correct?
No, I think it would apply to variable density.
Okay, so I think, and it may be that you think it makes sense here, but the question, and I think the answer is no. So this does not take into account variable density, right?
Objection states his answer.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think, Ms. Meisenheimer, if you would ask the question, you did ask the question, but let's, for clarity purposes, please ask it again, and we'll allow Mr. Durbin to respond again.
Yeah, I'm trying to ask the question. I'm not sure the answer quite corresponded to the question. The question is, this does not take into account variable density, correct?
It applies equally to density or non-density modeling of the system.
Okay, so it's your position that variable density would not impact this chart at all.
At a conceptual level, no.
Second. So you've drawn a gradient line here between the project well and the MCWD well, right?
Yes.
But water isn't actually flowing directly from the slant well area to the MCWD wells, right?
I think the later profiles in this report indicate that's exactly what's happening. Well, there's
You think water?
there's a little bit of drawdown right at the wells, but as soon as you get just a little ways east of the project wells, it's all downhill to the MCWD wells.
So you think water is flowing directly from the project wells to the MCWD wells?
It doesn't make any sense to say, are you talking about something regarding the pumping?
No, my question is more simple. It's that in your conceptual model, you are drawing water going from the project wells directly to the MCWD wells.
Objection, misstates the drawing. It's a picture of a gradient, not flow.
Well, I'm going to, I don't know if I'm overruling or sustaining the objection, but I see I see arrows on the diagram, and I'm also confused by the question. So maybe I'm trying to follow along, but maybe Ms. Meisenheimer, if you can try again, and then maybe I'll see if I can ask a follow-up question if necessary.
Sure. And again, it's a conceptual diagram. I'm trying to understand, and I think there's a flaw in this conceptual diagram, and that this has a line going from the project wells to the MCWD wells, correct?
It does.
But that's not actually the direction in the actual world that water is flowing, is it?
Oh, I understand now. It's this diagram, the profile at an angle to the regional flow, but it's still a valid diagram because there is a component of flow in the plane of this profile and another one normal to it. And this is what would happen in the plane of that profile.
If we could go to the next page, 12. And scroll down, please.
I'm
Here.
briefly going to interrupt Mr. Durbin, just for those of us who didn't. It's been a long time since I took a math class. When you say the direction of flow is normal to another plane, does that mean perpendicular?
Yeah, if I can, maybe on the diagram that's up on the screen right now. In general, the regional groundwater flow is eastward, somewhat parallel to the coast. And on the bottom line, where the profile line, where the where is perpendicular, generally perpendicular to the coast, that line follows basically along where particle tracks would go. So if one were to look at a cross section, the cross section only has flow in the plane. But now there's a different situation if you go to the upper red line. The particle tracks would cross the red line, the diagonal red line, going to the east. But any flow, groundwater flow, can always be broken into components. so that there is a in-plane component of flow, and there's a normal to the plane flow. And in vector analyses, those two components add up to the original native groundwater flow. So what the diagram that we were looking at, cross-section we were looking at before, represents the component of groundwater flow that's in the plane. I can see
Yeah,
you're
I
That's,
I feel like we've gotten a little bit out of sort of the cross-examination where
but we did,
question
no,
and
we took a
answer.
timeout. We took a timeout, and that was on my clock, if so to speak. So I'll turn
Yeah.
things back to you, Ms. Meisenheimer.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And so, Mr. Durbin, I truly am trying to keep this very simple, but when you look at this chart, page 12, again, there's a line that goes from the ocean to MCWD 35. You could theoretically draw them to some of the other wells also. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And would that typically be the direction of groundwater flow in that area?
No, the direction of groundwater flow is at an angle to that line.
And so the only question I have for you is, when we see your conceptual two-dimensional gradient drawing, it doesn't take into account the fact that there is also a line that goes from the ocean to these wells that is more typically the way that water is coming in, right?
I don't know whether there's a more typically about it.
I think that perhaps our experts will cover this, and it's best for us to move on. I don't want to soak up all of our time in this. So could we go to page 13? Okay. And this is your chart showing what you describe as the creation of a protective gradient in the lower 180-foot aquifer in the B scenario, right?
Correct.
Pardon me?
You asking me if this was my analysis of protective gradient? No. What was the
Yes.
question?
Yes, this is one of the charts that you have provided here, where, if I understand you correctly, you are saying that because the project is going to drop heads farther closer to the ocean than it will by the project, that necessarily creates a protective gradient. Is that right?
Objection misstates his testimony.
Hold on, I'm going to overrule the objection because I think Mr. Durbin's about to clarify that. So thank you, Mr. Durbin.
As I testified in my direct testimony, these are profiles that are extracted from the models, and the green one being the without project and the orange one being the with project. And that what this particular graph shows is that the gradient are flatter where they're than they would have been or with the project, and they would have been without the project. And one would just inspect the slope of the green line versus the slope of the orange line, and that results because the further away you get from the pumping wells, the smaller the drawdown, and that just mathematically creates a flatter gradient.
And I believe you term that flatter gradient a protective gradient. Is that right?
Yes, I use that termination. Well, I'm not the flatter gradient or the green or orange line. The concept of a protected gradient applies. There on this particular diagram, the green line doesn't show a mound anywhere in the 180-foot aquifer that would suggest that there was a protective hill, if you were, and so protected. I'm not sure protected gradient applies very well to this diagram. So since there's nothing to protect.
So you want to call it a flattened gradient. And it's your contention that that flattened gradient is a benefit from the project, right?
Yes.
Where in this diagram would mean sea level be?
Where on the diagram do I see it helping?
No, would mean sea level be?
Mean sea level is at about 3 feet, plus 3 feet.
So you would agree with me that the project pumping is dropping both the near shore and the far, like MCWD well 535, dropping both of those points farther below mean sea level, right?
Correct. So there's drawdown. So the orange line is everywhere lower than the green line.
And do you acknowledge that when you're dropping down the heads near the ocean, even if you're dropping them down a little bit less farther in, that can cause increased seawater intrusion?
That dropping the groundwater levels can cause seawater intrusion. Maybe state your question again. I'm sorry.
Sure. You have contended that this dropping of heads, and I believe let's just focus on the orange line, that sort of dropping from the green to the orange line is actually a benefit of the project because it flattens the gradient. My question to you is, isn't dropping those heads farther below sea level also potentially going to create more seawater intrusion?
No, and actually on this diagram, dropping the sea levels actually, when you go over on the left-hand side, there's the green line, and you can see that the project causes a reversal of the direction of flow in the, and so there's actually a seaward gradient where there had been a landward gradient, and that certainly is a benefit with respect to seawater intrusion.
And so I want to make sure I understand your testimony. It's that, in your opinion, the dropping of heads closer to the shore is not going to create increased seawater intrusion.
No, well, this is a profile. There's been another testimony that that there is seawater drawn into the capture zone, and in this left-hand side are actually groundwater levels in the capture zone, and the flow lines are after the capture zone is established is towards the coast.
Then I'm a little perplexed. It's your mathematical proof that you've put in. I understood you to be saying that the project would be creating protective gradients because it was causing more drawdown near the coast than farther inland. Is that not right?
I understand that. The if there were protective gradients along the a coast, inland from the coast, and which would mean that there were some seaward, the green line would slope down, at peak at some point and slope towards the coast. That would be the without the project. Now we add the project and we drop that down, line down, have the drawdown near the coast, and that steepens the gradient that otherwise would have existed. So it's a benefit in that sense. Now, where you have a situation like the green line or this diagram, and where there is no evidence in the profile of a protective gradients or protective heads near the coast, the conclusion that I would come to is that something would need to be done with management of the groundwater system to create a situation where there was a protective gradient, and the project would reduce the or make it easier to establish that condition. So that, let's say it's a reduction of pumping without the project, or a reduction of pumping with the project, a reduction in pumping within the basin would be less than it otherwise would be.
And Mr. Durbin, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm asking sort of very limited questions, and I feel like we're getting very far afield and the answers a lot broader. Perhaps, why don't I just ask it this way? You know, you have opined that the project is going to create protective gradients that will be a benefit for the project. But don't you also acknowledge that by causing drawdown near the seashore, the project will also induce increased seawater intrusion in certain areas?
There's two parts to that. The first is, my opinion is not that the project will create protective gradients or protective heads, but that if a gradient were to exist or to be created, then the project would benefit that management effort by reducing the amount of whatever had to be changed in order to create the protective gradients. And the other part, the drawdown here, creates it actually creates a protective head on the orange line, and it peaks inland, and then it's lower seaward. So here, just by happenstance on this profile, we've created a protective gradient with the project.
Oh, that's where I thought we started. So then I'm just going to keep this high level because we've got to wrap this up. In your opinion, and you put in these mathematical proofs saying that the project is going to create a protective gradient, if there's a protective gradient, you would expect to see at least the impact of the project, no eastward movement caused by the project of the seawater intrusion line, and less seawater intrusion into the basin, right? If you're creating a protective gradient.
So if the green line represented a protective gradient, so it had, rather than going on up to the left, it would peak out and go down. The project would steepen the seaward gradients And then on the other side, on the east side of the hump, it would create flatter gradients. So whatever movement of the Seattle water intrusion front that was going to occur would occur more slowly with the project than otherwise.
If a protective gradient, the seawater intrusion would move more slowly than without the project and less seawater intrusion. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so to the east
And-
of the, well, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Let me show you two things. If we can get exhibit CalAm 177, page 10 of the report. And these will be my final questions. And that's page 10 when you have a moment, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. And then the second bullet.
Would you mind reminding them which exhibit he's looking at?
Sure. This is exhibit 177, the same one we've been looking at the whole time. It's the TM that Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler put in, looking about the impacts of it's CalAm's transport modeling. So in the second bullet, I'm going to point you to that first sentence where it says the southern extents of the 1000 mg per L and 1500 mg per L TDS contours exhibit negligible change for scenarios 2B, 3B, and 2C, 3C, and slight increases for scenarios 2A and 3A and 2D and 3D. So do you understand this to be saying that despite whatever protective heads are there, well, let me rephrase that. Do you understand this to be saying that there are increases in seawater intrusion in the southern extent in scenarios 2A, 3A, and 2D, 3D?
Okay, yes.
And that's despite your contention that protective heads or protective gradients from the project should be a benefit to the MCWD wells.
The, well, first of all, this is more related to the other profile that I did, which is perpendicular to the coast. We've been talking about one that was from the slant wells to the well field. And I don't think there's anything inconsistent with this and the profiles that I developed for that profile alignment.
Okay, so just to be clear, the mathematical proofs you show are not inconsistent with an increase in the seawater intrusion front in the Monterey subbasin.
Well, now you went from southern to now the Monterey subbasin as a whole. I don't think you and I have spoke at all about the basin as a whole. And I'm referring to this southern area that's in this reference in this paragraph.
Sure. And do you understand whether that southern area is in the Monterey subbasin?
It may be, yeah, most of it may be in the Monterey subbasin. Certainly it's a profile that extends across that area.
And thank you. I have no further questions. I thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah, thank you for accommodating me. I'm sorry I had to ask.
Mr. Durbin, thank you. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you. You also.
Thank you, Ms. Meisenheimer. And then do I understand correctly that I should be looking to Mr. Well, I don't know if it's Mr. Bouchard. Well, yeah, it looks like it. Mr. Bouchard next. Mr. Durbin, are you okay to continue, or do you need a short break?
I'm fine.
I was going to ask for just a short 5-minute
Short
break,
break?
if that's okay.
Well, actually, what I'm going to do, I have something that needs my attention. So let's take a 15-minute break.
Okay.
And we will reconvene. It's 2:51, so let's reconvene at 3:06 and we'll pick up with Mr. Durbin. Thank you.
Ms. Kinsey, when we come back, could you give us a time estimate roughly of how much more time Mr.
Yes.
Durbin is?
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. I was trying to do math in the background to talk about what time we have left here. I have in my notes that we started at approximately 1:58 and went through to 2:51. But I also have in my notes that we should add at least about 5 minutes for some of my own questions and for pulling up charts and things like that. So I think when we add those two things together, that's approximately 12 minutes, and I'm just going to round it out to there's about 15 minutes remaining on the clock for cross-examination.
If I might be heard.
Yes, please.
With this witness in particular, I think there were some communication challenges and with sort of the audio going back and forth and sort of having to break questions up that took a little bit longer. I believe my colleague, Mr. Burchard, may have about a half an hour of questions. And I would hate it if sort of the slow going process there and sort of putting up a few extra things interfered with his ability to ask his questions. So I'm hoping that he is able to do so.
Might I respond?
Yes, you may, Mr. Osias.
I actually think more of the pace was dictated by unintelligible questions, showing a lack of mastery than the difficulty in hearing. I don't know how many questions had to do with elevation versus gradient. The witness was testifying about gradient. He kept getting questions about elevation. So I thought your rounding up was appropriate, but I don't think half an hour would be my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Mr. Osias. Let's see if we can come to an understanding here, because
I'm sorry, Ms. Quincy, but there certainly was never an intention for an unintelligible question, and some of it, the questions were directly using phrasing out of memos authored by the witness that then led to longer discussions. So I don't know that we get into a productive discussion with sort of personal characterizations, but I did feel the need to respond to that.
I understand that, Ms. Meisenheimer. I think what we're going to do, because I do think the line of questioning at sometimes there were some communication challenges that sometimes we, it actually is regardless. It was fairly productive for me. I do want to hear what Mr. Burchard has to ask. We do, I think, 15 minutes on the clock. What I'll do is let's go 15 minutes, Mr. Burchard, and then see how far we get. And then if you would just describe to me what we have remaining and where you're going with it, we'll do a check-in at that time, and then I will make a call. Mr. Osias, did you have something to add to that?
No, that's fine. But I did get a call from Mr. Durbin during the break who said, I recall that I put into evidence earlier in the proceeding materials that addressed your question about in the plane and normal. I may even be getting that vocabulary wrong. So he wanted to identify for you, not counting against their time, where you could find that.
I think that would be helpful for me. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's turn to Mr. Durbin. If you would please describe where we can find that, and then I will start the clock and hand things over to Mr. Burchard.
It's Kellam exhibit what is it, 152, slide 15.
And again, still on my time, Ms. Mullen, if you would just pull it up for me, just so I can lay eyes on it. It will help me remember if I have questions, what it is I'm looking for, since I'm not as familiar with the past evidentiary record. Okay. Thank you. I think we can take that down. That will help me. With that, Mr. Burchard, are you prepared to start your cross-examination?
Yes.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Can we pull up exhibit 192? Mr. Durbin, these are your summary slides, correct?
Yes, they are.
All right, and you intended these to be a summary of your written direct and rebuttal testimony for phase 3. Was that the intent?
Yes.
Okay. Can we look at slides 39 to 42? Can we just flip through those? Are you familiar with these slides?
Yes.
Okay. None of these slides or this testimony comes from your written phase 3 testimony, correct?
No, because they're in their rebuttal in response to things that were in the Marina Coast experts' written testimony.
These slides are talking about outcrops, sub-ocean outcrops of the DSA and the 180-foot aquifer, correct?
They are, yes.
Okay. And your criticism is that those outcrops are not present in the flow model, correct?
And the Marina Coast flow model, yes.
Okay. The flow model was part of phase 2, correct?
It is started in phase 2, but there's obviously been various experiments done by various parties, and it's relevant to the transport processes.
You had the flow model in phase 2, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And you were aware of how Marina Coast had set its boundary heads in the DSA and the 180-foot aquifer in the ocean, as opposed to the outcrops. You were aware of that in phase 2, correct?
I was, yes.
Okay. And you were aware of this, what we're looking at right here, these studies from 1970, they were available to you in phase 2, correct?
They were, yes.
Okay. And you did not address it in phase 2, correct?
No, because this relates to the protective gradients. And so the issues that brought these to the front come up on that issue.
Okay. And you had all this information when you submitted your direct testimony in phase 3, correct?
Well, I've had the information for ever since I did the initial modeling work back in 1978. So I've been in my library of papers.
Okay. You provided testimony on the protective gradients in phase 2, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And again, at that time, you were aware of how Marina Coast had set up its boundary heads in the DSA and the 180-foot aquifer?
Yes, but again, well, first of all, on phase 2, the AHO asked for additional profiles along the perpendicular line to the coast. So that revived this issue of protected gradients and brought it into this stage of the proceedings.
So you were responding to something that the AHO requested and not something that was in Marina Coast testimony?
Well, I'm responding to the Dr. Kincaid and the and his criticism or response to me with respect to gradients, which were in his phase 3 report.
His direct report, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and you didn't provide this in your written rebuttal testimony, correct?
No, it's just in my slides.
Do you have any TDS data for the outcropped aquifers?
I don't know.
Does anybody?
There may be some in these reports that I referenced, because part of the work involved dredge samples and off of the bay bottom, but and there may have been chemical analyses of those, but I don't know.
None that have been relied upon by any party in this proceeding, correct?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any data regarding the conductivity values in the outcropped aquifers?
No.
So just brief recap. These slides are a response to testimony that was in Dr. Kincaid's direct testimony that you did not provide in your written rebuttal, correct?
Well, maybe we should pull up my written rebuttal, because I'm forgotten what's in there.
I can represent that it's not in there.
Well, is it implied in there?
I think what we should do, maybe Mr. Brochard, I understand the point you're making and where we're going. I don't want this to take up a lot of our time. So if you're willing to withdraw the question, I understand the point you're making and
Yes, I'll withdraw the question.
move forward. Thank you.
Can we look at exhibit 43? Yeah, slide 40. I'm sorry, I meant slide 43. Mr. Durbin, this figure is also not in any of your written testimony, correct?
It is not.
And you did not prepare this figure, correct?
I did not prepare the background figure, the black lines. Everything that's been superimposed upon it is my work.
Okay. And the same thing for the next slide down, slide 44. This also is not in any of your written testimony, correct?
No, and this may come from, not positive, some past work of Dr. Ye, because that's my recollection, but you'd have to ask him that if it's in some written materials submitted to the state board.
Not in any of your written materials though, correct?
No.
Okay. Can we go to slide 6? The green, the yellow, and the orange in these figures, that depicts the seawater intrusion front, correct?
Yes.
Right. Do you agree with the depiction of the seawater intrusion front as it's shown in these figures?
I've done nothing independent to verify this. This is the mapping that has been produced for the Monterey County Water Resources Agency, and I received their GIS files, and that's how this was constructed.
The Monterey County Water Resource Agency maps that you base this on, they don't differentiate between the upper and the lower 180-foot aquifer, correct?
Correct, and that's why you see it identically on the two maps, because they lump it all together.
And it's your testimony now that there are interfingered regions of freshwater within the seawater intrusion zone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, are you basing that on any data that you have, or is that an assumption you're making based just on the fact that there are active wells?
No, it's first of all, it's not an assumption. It's a well-established fact in groundwater hydrology that heterogeneity produces these kinds of effects, and you could probably dig up several hundred papers that one way or another deal with this thing. It's just common professional knowledge of the character of these alluvial systems.
Okay, just to be clear, the seawater intrusion front that's mapped here comes from the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, correct?
Yes.
And you said that you didn't independently verify any of the underlying data, correct?
I did not.
So you're assuming that the maps are correct.
Yes, I am.
And then the fact that there are wells pumping, you are also assuming that there are interfingered areas of freshwater.
Yes, but it doesn't mean that all the well pumping is dependent upon that phenomenon.
What is the difference between an interfinger region of freshwater and an area that's not seawater intruded?
I'm not sure there is a difference. I mean, it sort of depends on what you mean by using that term and what I mean by using the term interfingered.
I'm sorry, did you say there is no difference?
Well, that's what I said initially, but I'm not sure what you have in mind when you ask if there's a difference. You must have some concept, and I have my concept that I call interfingering, and I can't judge whether mine matches yours.
Well, we're talking about your testimony here, Mr. Durbin. So why don't you tell me yours?
Well, you're trying to assign another another name to it. That's all I was reacting to.
So is there a difference between an interfingered region of freshwater and an area that's seawater intruded?
The conceptual yes, since you used the word freshwater, having, first of all, the interfingering doesn't mean that there's freshwater there. It simply means that there's opportunities to create areas of lower salinity, whether it's freshwater or not. That's would just be conjecture on my part, but the general processes are that they create these geographic and vertical variations in water quality due to the heterogeneity of the groundwater system.
The dots on this, in these figures that we're looking at, these are wells that your model has placed in the 180-foot aquifer, correct?
Well, they're not necessarily. Let me tell you what. Well, first of all, in my model, the regional model, the wells are not assigned to an aquifer. They're simply assigned to a depth within the groundwater system. On the local models, they are assigned to an aquifer, and but there's an important point that Dr. Ye made this morning that's relevant here, and that point is that some wells are screened in multiple intervals or multiple aquifers. And when I did this work, I just assigned the wells to the principal aquifer, the aquifer in which the most length of screen was located in. So that's how I come to identify something as 180 foot or 400 foot.
So I'm going to just call a pause and break in. I think according to the strict version of 15 minutes, that would be up in about a minute or two. Mr. Brochard, I just wanted to check in. I think your line of questioning has been quite efficient. We've covered a lot of ground. But can you just lay out for me what additional topics you want to cover and an estimate of how much time you think that might take?
I probably have 15 more minutes, and it's just on this issue of interfingered freshwater areas. You know, what Mr. Durbin has done in making these calculations, how much these wells are pumping in the models, how long he thinks these will last.
Okay. So I'm going to, I'm going to grant the same type of leeway I will grant on the other side, Mr. Osias. But I think we are moving along. Please, Mr. Brochard, keep up the pace. But I would like to, I think this is productive. So I would like to go on. I will give you another 15 minutes.
Thank you.
So let's please continue.
Mr. Durbin, the figure on the left, those are all of the wells that are active in the regional model and the flow models that are in the screened in the 180-foot interval, correct?
When you say the regional models and the flow models, these are wells that are in the regional model, but I think both parties did different things as far as assigning wells to the particular aquifer. So these don't represent what is in the two local models, and those two local models are quite different in what they've done.
Have you looked at the local models to verify whether that statement is correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So which of the local models is not showing these wells in the 180-foot aquifer?
Well, both of them, I mean, not all of them, but some of them, if you can, this morning, Dr. Ye presented some maps, two maps on a single slide that showed the wells in his 180 versus the wells in the Marina Coast delineation of the 180. And when Dr. Ye did that, there were a few of these wells in his model are assigned to a few of the wells inside the mapped intruded zone are in his model. There's essentially, and the rest of them are generally in his model, whether they're exact dots or not, I'm not sure. and like, and correspondingly, the map for the Marina Coast model shows essentially no wells in the 180 anywhere.
The figure on the right, those are the wells that you have more data for, correct?
Yes.
What data do you have for the wells on the right that you don't have for the wells on the left?
Well, on the left, I had information, highly reliable information on the location of the wells, the depths to the screened intervals, and the monthly pumping. And for the ones on the left, was missing one or more of those items.
Can we go to exhibit 186, please? And can we go to page 3? Scroll down one more paragraph. Thank you. Mr. Durbin, the middle of the middle paragraph, you say, for the 180-foot interval, about 70% of the wells are inside the seawater intruded region as delineated by the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, and about 30% are outside of that area. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Mr. Durbin, do you see what I'm talking about?
I said I do.
Okay. When you say 70% of the wells, you mean the wells that you have more information for, right? Not total wells?
I would have to look at that map that you were just, I'm not sure right now which I was referring to here. I think it was probably all wells, but to be sure, I'd have to look at the maps you and I were just looking at a moment ago.
Okay. Can we go to, staying on this exhibit, can we go to page 24? These are the wells that you have more complete information for, correct?
Can you zoom out so I can see what I'm looking at? Yes.
And this is the 180-foot aquifer.
Right.
How did you determine which wells are in the seawater intrusion zone and which ones are outside?
By the mapping of the agency.
How accurate is that?
I don't know. I know it's a generalization of, but it's. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything where somebody's tried to put an accuracy on the position of the lines.
Yeah, here's my question. And Ms. Mullen, can you zoom in, please? And the dot that's 249, it's kind of in the middle towards the right. Mr. Durbin, can you see well 249, or do you need us to zoom in more?
I see it actually.
Is this inside or outside of the seawater intrusion zone?
It's right on the edge of the mapped area. Yeah.
We go to page 28, please. You can zoom out a little. This is the table, or this is a table you created that identifies wells that are what you would define as inside or outside of the seawater intruded area, correct?
Yes.
All right, you put 249 on the outside here, correct?
It's one of the columns. Yes.
Okay. Is well 249, that's in your regional model, correct?
Yes.
Does the regional model simulate that well as pumping?
No, there's not that kind of detail in the regional model. Because you know, the thing is that there are so few of these wells that we know what they're pumping, that the assignment of pumping in the regional model is different than this table would indicate.
I'm not sure you answered my question. Does the regional model assign pumping to well 249?
Some pumping, yeah.
How much?
I don't know without looking at the regional model file.
What about well 55? Does the regional model assign pumping to well 55?
Yes, it probably does.
About well 187?
Yeah. Yes, these are all wells that are in the.
Do you have any data post 2015 on any of these wells?
I don't. Well, I have no individual well data. I only have data that the agency publishes on the subbasin level.
What was the calibration period for the flow models?
Well, it's different for the two, for the different models, the regional and the model and the CalAm local model were calibrated to 2017 to 2019 recharge, but 2019 to 2021 pumping. I think the Marina Coast model, local model, was calibrated for both recharge and pumping to 2019 to 2021.
Okay. And some of these wells are being modeled as if they are pumping water, when in reality they may not be. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Can we go to page 4, please? The first full paragraph, Mr. Durbin, that starts with the word inside. It says, inside the seawater intruded region of the 180-foot and 400-foot intervals, wells have tended to cease operating prior to the arrival of seawater intrusion at the well location, where the occurrence of intrusion is derived from the mapping produced by the Monterey County Water Resource Agency. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Okay. That's not a true statement for wells in the 180-foot aquifer, correct?
I don't think the first sentence is incorrect. Maybe you can.
We go to page 27. This is supposed to be a graphical representation of that statement, correct?
Yeah. Mhm.
All right. And the yellow dots are the wells in the 180-foot interval.
They are.
Okay. And all of them, or at least the ones that stop pumping, all stop pumping well after the area was designated as seawater intrusion, as seawater intruded by the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, correct?
That's correct, and that's one of the, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so none of the wells in the 180-foot aquifer ceased pumping prior to being designated seawater intruded area by Monterey County, correct?
That's it. Let me just familiar myself. So you're intruded. Yes, the 180-foot aquifers happened. The wells turned off later.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did
they
you-
turned off. Just a second.
Did you create this graph?
I did.
Okay, there's the blue dots represent the wells that have stopped pumping in the 400-foot interval, correct?
Yes.
I see 9. Is that right?
Yes.
And then if I look on your table, table 2, starting on page 29, I thought more than 9 had stopped pumping.
And just so you know, Mr. Burchard, I have about a minute on the clock for you.
Okay. All right, so let me do this real quick. Can we go to page 31? I apologize, 32. Mr. Durbin, the chart, it identifies as outside of the SWI region wells 188, 190, 195, 196, 208, 209. Do you see that?
This is for the 400 foot.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, can we go to PDF page 25? And we zoom in. You can see right in the middle of the seawater intruded area there, towards the left, 188, 195, 190. All of those are in the seawater intruded area, correct?
Help me. Which? Oh, the 188, 195, and 190. Is that what you're interested in?
Yeah, those are in the seawater intruded area, correct?
Can we scale back out so we can see as of when? I think these colors relate to years, do they not?
Yes, the different colors are different years, which are indicated in the table, the legend.
So which year are you asking about?
We're talking about the chart on page 32. And right now, what I'm going to ask is whether the chart misidentifies a bunch of these wells as outside of the seawater intruded region when the map seems to indicate they are inside the seawater intruded region.
But it depends on the year. So what year are you asking about?
Can you look at page 32 in the chart, please? Mr. Durbin, where it says outside seawater intruded region and inside seawater intruded region at the top of the chart, do you see that?
I do.
Okay. 188, 190, 195, 196. Those are listed as outside of the seawater intruded region, correct? Is there a year?
Well, there's certainly a year that they stopped pumping during the 93 to 2015.
I know, but there is this chart supposed to designate what year it was inside or outside of the seawater intruded region?
No, not at all.
No. So if at any point it's inside the seawater intruded region, then this chart should list it as inside the seawater intruded region, correct?
Oh, that's correct, yes.
Okay. So this chart, or at least this portion, is not correct, right?
And what's not correct about it?
All of those wells in the outside seawater intruded region, all of those should be inside seawater intruded, correct?
Um,
Can you see the other picture now?
let's go back to the map again. So let me write this down just a second. Let's see what we got.
The map is page 25.
Yeah, I know what happened here. Unfortunately, my assistant had made an error in the well numbers that are on the map, and I apologize, but there's a mismatch between the maps and the table, so I'd have to get a corrected value, a corrected version of this.
We go to page 5, please.
And Mr. Burchard, is this continuing on the same line of questioning? I do want you to finish up, but I just want to make sure we're not moving to a new topic.
I am trying to wrap up. We're still talking about the interfingered regions. I am moving off of those maps though, or
Okay,
at least that chart.
let's make this your last foray, if you would, please.
Okay. Mr. Durbin, the top paragraph, last sentence, you say during the 1993 to 2015, the lag period ranged from a few years to 20 years. Is it your opinion that these interfingered regions of freshwater can last up to 20 years?
That they could last for a long period. I don't know what the sample is so small that there's no way of telling whether we're looking at outliers or not.
Okay, if there's decreased pumping around these areas and a flattened gradient, could these lag periods last longer than 20 years?
If there's decreased agricultural pumping, sure.
Could they last forever?
I don't see how that's possible.
Okay. If there's increased extractions in these agricultural wells, is that likely to decrease the lag period?
Objection, lacks foundation that they're agricultural wells.
I'm
Read-
thinking about, I
read
think,
the-
go ahead.
The next
Mr.
sentence says some appear not to be agricultural.
The implication is that some do.
I think I was gonna say, I think Mr. Durbin also raised the point that he's at this point talking about agricultural wells. So with that limitation, Mr. Durbin, do you need, what? I may have lost the question now. So Mr. Durbin, do you need the question again? Or are you able to respond?
I need the question again, please.
Okay.
If there's an increase in these agricultural wells pumping, could that reduce the lag period? The time it takes to get rid of the interfingered regions?
I would expect so, yes.
Okay. If the TDS in this area is to increase, would that also decrease the lag period?
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question, all of those wells that are pumping in the area designated as seawater intruded, would the presence of those wells have an effect on the flow models and the transport models?
Effect is pretty broad. I'm not sure what effect you're thinking about here.
They have any effect?
I'm trying to have you be more specific about what effects might occur. But go ahead.
You're the expert, Mr. Durbin. What effects could occur?
Well, there could be effects to the model calibration, sort of in the same way that I discussed about the boundary conditions on the Marina Coast model that the that could have an impact on those boundary conditions have an impact on the calibration and the distribution of pumping likewise could. Yes.
Last question. If the project increases the TDS level in these areas that are already designated as seawater intruded, is that likely to reduce or eliminate these interfingered regions of freshwater?
You know, to the extent that they let me put it this way. What we really need to be thinking about is the differential effect of the project, and you're asking a question about the increase in TDS and whether in a specific area what would happen. We don't know because we don't have area specific information. And all I can say is that on a large scale, there are these, most likely these zones of lower salinity, and if they got higher and the water use was sensitive to that change, then there'd be an impact. On the other hand, if they're not sensitive to the change, then there wouldn't be an impact.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin. Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you, Mr. Burchard, and thank you very much, Mr. Durbin. I think at this point, where my understanding of where we are is that we would turn next, and I am going to call at least a 5-minute break, but we would turn next to Ms. Meisenheimer for your opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Leffler. Does that fit with your understanding of where we are?
Close. I actually think the next step, Dr. Ye will be the next witness, and we're flipping.
Okay.
We traded off on order. Mr. Burchard goes first on Ye, and I go second.
Does that, does anyone have any, that suit everyone else? Any objections that we would proceed next with Dr. Ye as the next witness for cross-examination? I'm looking at my screen because, I see Dr. Ye. Dr. Ye is here. I assumed you would be, but there's so many tiles. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So it is 3:53. Let's come back at 3:58. What I imagine what we'll do is we'll get through maybe Mr. Burchard's questions. We probably will have, we're not going to make a full hour. And then we will, I don't think. And then we may have to pick up tomorrow with you, Ms. Meisenheimer. So that's what I anticipate, but let's return back at 3:58. Thank you. All right, it's 3:58 and I think we're back. I see Dr. Ye, thank you for joining us again. And I see Mr. Brochard. So we will go ahead and I will hand things over to you, Mr. Brochard. You may start your cross-examination.
And apologies, Ms. Quincy. We, Kyle and I, or Mr. Brochard and I conferred over the break. I think I have fewer questions for Dr. Ye than Mr. Brochard. And so if it works for you, I will proceed and try to get through mine today and then turn it over to Mr. Brochard.
That is fine with me. Please go ahead.
Great. Dr. Ye, good afternoon.
Excuse me, Ms. Kinsey, does that mean we're gonna go a full hour till 5 and then more time on top of that tomorrow morning?
No, my understanding is Ms. Meisenheimer is going to ask her questions, which will take some time that's less than an hour, and then we will start again tomorrow morning. Is that correct?
That is correct. And Mr. Brochard will have questions for Dr. Ye after me. Again, I will try to keep this short.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Ye, I know we have spoken previously on a number of occasions. As usual, if you don't understand one of my questions, just let me know. To start with, I did notice that your rebuttal testimony and Mr. Loeffler's rebuttal testimony often appear to be copied and pasted from each other. And my question to you is whether you drafted the text in your rebuttal testimony.
It's a joint effort.
Did you actually type the words that are in your testimony?
Yes,
Okay. Did others prepare some of it for you to review and approve?
I provide this for grammar and some formatting review.
Okay. So you typed everything in your rebuttal testimony and then provided it to others for review and approval. Is that right?
Yes.
Wait, objection,
that mean
you said it was a
Sorry, yeah.
joint effort. And then the question is not joint, so the witness needs to be very careful, and I don't think she should misstate his answers like that.
Well, let's pause for a second. I do want to make sure in particular here because just following the being very specific and moving through slowly. I understand this may take a little time, Ms. Meisenheimer. So let's just be very careful about and step through this again. I think let's start with the last question. I think the one word which I'm not sure Dr. Ye used was approval, review and approval. I just don't recall. We don't have anyone to read back the transcript. So maybe if you can try the question again, if approval is an important part, let's be more, if you would clarify what you mean by that when you ask it.
That was certainly a part of my question. And again, I apologize. I'm trying to move quickly
I
here.
understand that.
I'll
And
get
I
it right.
just want to make sure Dr. Ye can follow exactly what the question is here.
Okay, so Dr. Ye, did you type the words in your testimony?
Yes.
And then you sent them to somebody else for review and editing. Is that right?
Pretty much the grammar and the formatting.
Okay, but the words in your testimony are yours. Is that right?
Yes.
I think I'll leave it at that and we can ask Mr. Loeffler similarly.
Thank you.
If we could put up revised Calam 190 slide 4. And this may be when we need to zoom in a little, Ms. Mullen. I'm going to be asking about and particularly the bottom left part of that chart. Dr. Ye, do you recognize this figure?
Yes.
Can we, and I'm
Is
sorry to
this a-
interrupt, Ms. Mullen, can we zoom out just one or two so we can see I can still see the key on the side there? There, perfect. Does that work for you, Ms. Meisenheimer, do you think?
Yes,
wanna
and
go in?
maybe
I don't know if,
to
is there an
start
in
out, why don't we zoom out a little so everyone can see what it is to start? It's probably a
Okay.
good idea.
All right. I know this is taking a little time. That's in my mind, so.
Thank you. And the title to this, if we could see that, states that the project will not cause TDS-based impacts to the 18400 subbasin. Do you see that?
Yes,
Okay. And in the bottom left corner, do you see the Monterey subbasin portion of that chart?
yes,
In the bottom left corner is the comparison showing CalAmp's prediction for what will happen as a result of project pumping, comparing 3B minus 1B, correct?
yes,
And do you see that the red in the Monterey subbasin indicates substantial increases in the TDS in the nearshore area in the Monterey subbasin?
Objection to the word substantial.
Ms.
Sure.
Meisenheimer, will you ask the question again? I'm going to sustain it just without the word substantial. We'll let Dr. Ye characterize it.
Do you see that the red indicates increases in the TDS in the nearshore area in the Monterey subbasin?
yes, yeah. I just want to point out that the upper two panels that color flat using a different scale compared to the lower two panels.
Thank you. But you would agree that what this diagram, the comparative diagram shows is an increase in TDS behind the seawater intrusion line in the Monterey subbasin, correct?
Yes,
Is it your belief that increases in seawater intrusion behind the 1500 TDS contour line do not constitute harm?
so to answer your question, when I evaluated this, I also look at the model simulate TDS concentration under no project condition. That means the upper left panel.
Okay, but we are looking here at the comparative one, right? 3B minus 1B, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So I'm going to ask my question again because I don't think I quite got an answer. Is it your belief that increases in seawater intrusion behind the 1500 TDS contour line do not constitute harm?
Correct. But like if the if that TDS concentration under no project condition already very high.
If we could go to slide 6, groundwater storage. Dr. Ye, do you recognize this as your calculation of the groundwater storage impacts in the Monterey subbasin as a result of the project?
Yes.
And if we note, it is just for the Monterey subbasin here, right? That's what this heading denotes.
Yes.
In doing this calculation, you have excluded all drawdown that is less than 0.2 feet. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you know what the storage loss would have been if you'd included the areas with less than 0.2 feet?
I didn't do that calculation.
You also excluded areas with TDS greater than 1,000 /L. Is that the same as TDS? Can I use that there? Or if that confuses you, let me just rephrase the question then. You say this is, you've excluded areas with TDS greater than 1,000 mg-L, correct?
Right, yeah.
Are you aware that the state board's sources of drinking water policy provides that all surface and groundwaters of the state are considered to be suitable or potentially suitable for municipal or domestic water supply and should be so designated. And then it lists two exceptions. One is where the total dissolved solids exceed 3,000 mg-L. Are you aware of that standard?
No, the one I use here, 1,000, that's the state secretary MCL, the maximum level for drinking water.
And there's also a second threshold TDS that's sometimes applied at the 10,000 mg-L value. And that's from the definition of an underground source of drinking water to be protected under the Federal Underground Injection Control UIC Act regulations as a part of the Code of Federal Regulations. Are you aware of that standard?
Yes.
Did you do a calculation that looked at groundwater storage loss if you included water with TDS less than 3,000 and or less than 10,000 mg/L?
I didn't do that calculation.
Okay. If we could go to slide 54, please. Okay. So in this slide, you opine that the water coming off of the FOSVA at the U-turn does not provide fresh water to any wells. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you cite several examples from different modeling, and I'd like to focus on the bullet. It's the first sub-bullet where you say Trudell depicts the U-turn flowing through 4,000 to 9,000 mg/L TDS. And you cite Dr. Trudell's figure. Do you see that?
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you some questions about that. So if Dr. Trudell depicts water with a TDS of 4,000 to 9,000 TDS, would fresh water coming off the FOSVA that mixes with that lower the TDS?
Yes, but I think that change would be very small because you compare to the amount of water from offshore, then compared to the amount of fresh water that mixed together.
So you think there may be some benefit to lowering the TDS but not by much, is that right?
Right.
And then as this water goes around the U-turn and flows east, it moves into an area with fresher water, isn't that right?
So are you talking about this water flowing to upper 180?
Yeah, I'm talking about what's on your slide here, the U-turn flow off the FOSVA. So where the water comes off the FOSVA and then U-turns into the aquifers. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And as that water moves east, it moves towards where there's fresher water. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And so there would again be some mixing that would lower the total TDS at that point, correct?
Yeah, but again, I think it's really needed to look at the amount of water mixed together.
And are you aware that some water companies are able to blend water that has a slightly higher TDS with lower water TDS in order to make it usable?
I'm not.
And we've already discussed the standards that are with the state board and the Code of Federal Regulations. And you would agree that those have thresholds of 3,000 TDS and 10,000 TDS for looking for sources for potential groundwater, correct?
No, I'm only looking at 1,000 milligram per liter.
Okay. And then I'd like to pivot to the recharge issues. And I spoke briefly with Mr. Durbin about them as well, but I think you were more involved. And specifically, it's your position at this point that the recharge used in the phase 2 Callium flow model is incorrect, right?
I wouldn't characterize this way. I know it's overestimate.
And so the recharge in the 2022 or 2023 Callium flow model is overestimated. Is that right?
Yes.
And as a result of that, would you agree that some of the K values in the 2023 Callium flow model are probably incorrect?
Again, I wouldn't say incorrect. If you go back to our phase 2 modeling report, we did 46 sensitivity runs, including changing the amount of recharge. So we know how that affects the model calibration. It's really in very small area, pretty much for the purged aquifer above FOSVA. And
do you think, oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, and also that effect, it's very small. You only need adjust K slightly, then you can get a good calibration. So that K change, still within the reasonable range.
Okay.
So I wouldn't
But there are
say
some
that
K values that you would want to change as a result of the changing recharge, right?
Yeah, very small amount in a very limited area in the model layer 2 purged aquifer.
And so to address this issue, you put together the RS scenario, the recharge sensitivity scenarios, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the amount of a recharge we believe more representative.
And we looked at those, the amount of the reduction with Mr. Dermott a moment ago. I can put that up again if it's helpful to you. I'm going to ask you a quick question about it. Would you like me to put the actual recharge up?
Yes, please.
If we could get Callium 177, page 17, please. And it is table 3.2. Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Okay. And so, Dr. Ye, I don't want to go through this in detail again, but is it fair to say that the recharge sensitivity scenarios generally reduce recharge within the dune sand complex by about 60%?
Yes.
And all of the recharge outside of the dune sand complex is reduced by less than 10%, correct?
Yes. I think the reason for that is really due to the amount of recharge for different land use type. So when Mr. Durbin provided the regional model recharge information to us, he provided 3 items. One is the land use shared files by different land use like agricultural, urban, non-irrigate. He also provided 2 tables showing the recharge rates. One is in unit of acre feet per year. The other is like its unit recharge. It's like inch per year. So we took the inch per year applied to our groundwater model. But I think one thing we didn't get is that inch per year, that recharge unit rate, it's really not applied to the entire land use because
Dr. Ye,
yeah.
I'm going to let you finish if you want. My question was really just more basic, and I want to talk about the impact of the change. Again, if you feel you want to go into that, or your counsel can give you a chance to really explain sort of a lot of the back working.
Because this you know, if you understand, then you will understand the impact of the recharge. So
and so I have a
Wait,
question
please
I
let
can
him
ask
finish.
you
Please-
about.
Please let him
Let-
finish.
Let's pause here. So I think I'd like to allow Dr. Ye to finish. I understand you have limited time and we'll take that into account. But
Thank you.
I'd like to allow Dr. Ye to provide this background because it'll probably help me understand it. And
yeah,
then we'll
so,
to you, Ms. Meisenheimer. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Ye.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So what information didn't provide to us is the actual impervious area assumed for each land use type. For example, in the agricultural area, maybe the permeable area is 90%. But like in urban area, the permeable areas maybe only like 30%. So then, because we didn't have that information, so we used the table with the inch per year. Then we apply to that entire area. That's why it caused the differences. But then, if you look at the pervious area percentage, then for the agricultural area, it's pretty similar. But for urban area, then you will have some larger differences. That's why you see within Dune Sand complex area, because that is the urban area. So that's why we have a larger differences. But outside the Dune Sand area, lots of agricultural area, you will see smaller differences.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ye. And back to you, Ms. Meisenheimer. Go ahead. Thank
you. Appreciate it. So I wanted to ask you about one of the impacts of reducing the recharge in the DSA. Do you think that recharge off of the DSA is a potential source of fresh water that goes into the slant wells?
Yes.
So if we could put up Exhibit CalAm 177, page 26, please. We're going to look at table 3.8. Dr. Ye, do you recognize this chart as the model predicted average ocean water percentage for the various scenarios?
Yes.
And I'm going to compare it to scenario 3, which is the pumping scenario here, the recharge scenario 3. And would you agree that in scenario A, the reduction of recharge off the DSA increased OWP by 3%?
Yes.
Okay. And the reduction of recharge from the DSA in scenario B, again, increased OWP by 3%.
Yes.
And in C, that elimination of recharge increased OWP by 2%.
Yes.
And in scenario D, that elimination of recharge from the DSA increased OWP by 5%. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So the elimination of the recharge in and of itself, we've talked about whether that's a source for the increase in OWP. I'd like to pivot to another potential reason. If we could put up MCWD 168, page 11.
Could we show him the front page first, if that's okay, so he can recognize the document?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So let's start with MCWD Exhibit 168. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. If we could scroll down to the title when you have a moment. Thank you. And if you could scroll down to the next page, please. Oh dear, I seem to have the wrong. Could you go to page 11? I think I may have the wrong document here. And that was 168.
Ms. Meisenheimer, are you looking for the rebuttal testimony of Ms. Nelson?
Yes, thank you.
That's what I have as 168 also, just, so I'm not sure that was what was put up.
You may have, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Osias. I thought I had double checked that this morning. Dr. Ye, do you see that this is Ms. Nelson's rebuttal testimony for phase 3? If we could go to page 11 of the PDF, table 1. And do you recognize this, Dr. Ye, as the CalAm WBSSM 2023 calibration statistics for calibrated model versus calibrated model with recharge sensitivity?
Yes.
And so just to put it in we normal lay people talk, what I see here is we've got the model layers on the left, correct?
Yes.
And the calibrated model statistics, the phase 2 flow model in the middle.
Yes.
And then the right 3 columns are the phase 2 flow model, but with the RS recharge swapped in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so let's look at the upper dune sand model layer 2. Do you see that row across? And do you see that the mean residual in the calibrated phase 2 model is 1.2?
Yes.
And that means that CalAm's model is on average under predicting heads in the DSA by 1.2 feet, right?
Yes.
And with these RS scenarios, do you see that CalAm is now under predicting heads in the DSA by an average of 7.91 feet?
Yes.
Okay. And similarly for the upper 180 foot, the calibrated phase 2 model understates heads by 1.57%. Do you see that?
Yes.
And on average, the swapping the RS and drops it by a foot to about 2.51 feet of under prediction. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that means that the heads near the shore are under predicted more in the RS scenario, right?
No, this is for all the wells.
Let me ask it to you more generally. Would you expect that under predicting heads near the slant wells would result in a higher ocean water percentage predicted by the models?
Would you please repeat your question again?
Sure. All else being equal, would you expect that under predicting heads in the area of the slant wells would bring in more seawater and cause a higher anticipated OWP.
I cannot answer your question. Because here you're talking about the water levels and you really need to look at the change in gradients. So just by looking at the residual, I cannot answer your question.
So you need to look at the residuals and the impact on lowering gradients as well to answer the question.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Meisenheimer. I have, just so we're all aware of the clock, I have 4:29 on the clock. We started at 4, I have 4:29 now, but I wrote down about 3 minutes as mine. So I think we're 26 minutes in. But again, you know, some leeway is appropriate here. So, and I will extend that courtesy to everyone. I think before we break for the day, in my anticipation, we would pick up tomorrow with Mr. Brochard's opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Ye. Thank you, Dr. Ye, for joining us today, and thank you for your testimony today. Thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony today. I do want to address before we break, I'd like to hear from Marina Coast and then City of Marina about the ordering of your witnesses. I think that'd be helpful for everyone, including me. And then we can address anything else that we need to address before 5 p.m. and then we can break. So I will turn first to the appropriate representative from Marina Coast. Will you please let us know what you anticipate in terms of the order of your witnesses?
I will leave that to Mr. Wilkins.
Great.
We had not had a chance to confer with the city. We were actually going to propose that the city's witnesses go first if the city's witnesses are ready, but we did not get a chance today to confer with them about this. And so assuming that they are on the cuff willing to do that, that's what we would propose. If they are not, then our witnesses are certainly prepared. But we thought that because of the way the phase 3 testimony worked, that it would make logical sense for the city to go first. And so we would propose that. I don't know if the city has a response to that. And then in terms of our witnesses, I believe Ms. Nelson is going to go first and then Dr. Kincaid.
It may make sense for us to confer briefly. We even take a 5-minute break now to confer just to figure this out, or Mr. Spalding may have an answer at hand that he can provide.
We can do that, or I'm more than happy to give you I can even give you about a 7-minute break if you want a moment, unless Mr. Spalding, you know off the top of your head.
I don't. Okay. We are going to have Dr. Trudell before Mr. Titsa, but we need to confer otherwise.
Let's go ahead and take a break because I think everybody wants to know. We're all on the edge of our seats. Let's come back at 4:40 and we will address, hopefully you'll have an answer for us and we can address this and then we'll all know what to expect. I will see you in 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello.
All right, it's 4:40 and I believe we're back. So I will turn to you, Ms. Meisenheimer, because you're off mute and see if you have
Justin, yes.
a response and
Um,
answer to our questions.
Perfect, thank you. We've conferred about what would make sense here. And given that in this particular phase, our experts have been very sort of intertwined and handling pieces of the same thing and handing them off together, what we would propose is putting them on sort of as a group of 4 in the order of Dr. Trudell, Miss Nelson, Mr. Titza, and then Dr. Kincaid. And then, of course, they would all be available for the similar cross-exam sort of in the panel or one by one, sort of similar to what we are doing on our cross-exam.
Understood. I understand the proposal, and then I will look to you, Mr. Asias. Once again, I'm picking on you because you're off mute. Do you have any concerns about that proposal about intermixing the party's witnesses?
Conditionally, no.
Okay,
And you'll say, what's the condition you're interested in, Mr. Osias? And I'd say, it doesn't dictate in which order we cross-examine.
I think that's fine. I mean, the district and the city reordered the witnesses for purpose of their cross-exam, so
Yep.
I think that I can understand that caveat.
Okay.
So it sounds like we have a plan going forward. We'll start with Mr. Trudell, then Ms. Nelson, Mr. Titza, and Dr. Kincaid. Sometime we will start that sometime tomorrow, I presume. Is there anything else that we need to discuss today before we break until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? All right. Well, I want to thank, once again, I want to thank all of the witnesses. I know it's a lot of work to be on the stand and answering questions and talking to me for many hours of the day, and I appreciate it. And I will see all of you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and we'll get started. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.